When you think of zombie-related media, kids are not typically something that comes to mind. The carnage of the dead rising to eat the living is too brutal for an adolescent, for a child's mind, and for some viewers to handle. Amongst the lore and virology of a zombie virus in many different universes, kids are usually omitted due to anatomical and biological factors, only ever having adults run around as zombies or infected. In some cases, child or adolescent variants crop up with workarounds that give them special qualities that set them apart from the regular undead. But why, in most cases, are children so few and far between in zombie media? You probably had an easy answer in mind when you clicked this video: censorship, and the mandated rule to not display violence towards children or show them being killed. Is there an age restriction on the reanimation pandemic from being a survivor or being a zombie? Why do some kids slip through the cracks in that case and gain all access to being a zombie buffet? It boils down to Dark Carnival's tagline of "You must be this tall to die." No offense to short adults. Sorry, babe. Today, we are discussing why are there no kids in zombie apocalypses. In an overwhelming majority of scenarios, when a zombie horde comes rushing in, most, if not all, of those deadites are full-grown adults. When people think of zombies rising from the dead, they think of it as a field day to survive against and go on a killing spree, especially against perfect targets to be hacked, whacked, attacked, smacked, and cracked. Adults are fair game for violence. It's in our viewer nature to basically expect it in most media. Hell, Lois sings it at the beginning of every episode of Family Guy. In some cases, it's even stated that violence is basically within human nature due to evolutionary, societal, and psychological factors. But a general rule of thumb across most human societies is to leave kids out of it.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
It is taboo, specifically children being incorporated into one of the most gruesome and gory horror genres out there, the zombie genre. Outside of zombie-themed parodies and cartoon episodes throughout the last few decades, you typically do not see crotch goblins roaming around much when the dead come knocking or when the world crumbles. Even then, when kids are prominently displayed within the undead apocalypse, there never seems to be any worry for their safety. Children typically are usually impervious to the horrors of zombie-isms, thanks to a blend of three different things. First, heavy plot armor. Second, audiences being too fragile to the concept. And three, and most importantly, restrictions and strict ratings set by governmental media boards across the world. There are two subjects within this video: the use of children within zombie media that makes them so few and far between, and why they are used so sparingly, and then later on, why so much zombie media canonically does not have zombie children or young survivors. Video games, movies, and television series all, at their core, are trying to not only convey a story and make some good gameplay, but also make money. Honestly, that is the largest goal for any production. That's just how the world works. Depicting children getting harmed, killed, and eaten up has historically shown to have audience members walk out and production companies not greenlight something or outright change it to meet that end. While these days these unwritten rules have become more lax in areas, ultimately kids in the zombie role or against the zombie role will have them in a graphic form of harm's way. When adolescents get involved in more than just being a background character, they typically have to have a purpose. Kids are powerful narrative tools for the dark side of the end of the world, to lay out the true horrors of a zombie apocalypse, to paint a grim picture of innocence destroyed, lives cut short, childhoods extinguished, to create hardened individuals, survival of the fittest, weeding out the weak. And a prime example of this being the popular zombie television series, The Walking Dead. I mean, the first walker we ever experienced within this universe was that of a lonely little girl, picking up a teddy bear in the midst of a quiet and forgotten world, walking aimlessly as Officer Rick Grimes attempts to help her, only to see her chewed face and deadened stare, a former human stomping towards him. Rick's former life as a sheriff to help those in need upheaved in an instant. A little girl being the very monster that he now needed to put down. It was a curveball for anyone that tuned in, and still is to this day. Not only that, but him actually shooting and killing her, which, side note, for those unaware, both the gunshot and her getting hit are in two different shots. This is to avoid a connected scene of cause and effect, something that is consistently used in many forms of media to avoid direct violence at children, not showing it at the same time. But beginning the series with such an impactful statement that no one is safe, that kids can be monsters destined only for carnage and death, to say to us and the survivors that the most protected and innocent of us can become the demons we face. 1973's The Exorcist perfectly describes this.
I think the point is to make us despair, to see ourselves as animal and ugly.
Yet instead of a demonic entity taking over a child within the realm of spirituality, it's a virus turning a kid into a mindless cannibalistic monster within the realm of science. While Walker hordes would always be adult undead going forward, The Walking Dead would continue to have children be in the crossfire on both ends, with each instance being impactful, spending an entire season on a farm looking for Sophia with the expectation that she would miraculously show up one day, because that's how it always has to be, which is the major reason why the reveal of dead Sophia in the barn of walkers was so memorable in the midst of a boring season. It stood again to show us and the characters what the world was. Herschel had hesitated to kill any walkers as he bided time for a cure, only for the final walker to be gunned down to be the daughter of Carol, and for Rick to be the one to do it. It gave the final nail in the coffin that zombification was the end-all, be-all of everything going forward, and that no one was safe. It was the catalyst for change for not only everyone there, but the audience as well. Carl would go on to become numb to the idea of killing, executing a teenager that he deemed a threat from what he saw his father and Shane had to do against the dead and other survivors. Carl had also been sexually assaulted by the wolves, who were willing to do something so heinous to a young boy as he watched his father rip them apart like a common walker, showing that a parent might have to do anything they can, even become a monster, to protect their young. Carol takes on the mother role for two girls, only for Lizzie to go insane, unable to cope with what the world had become, killing her sister just for the fact that she wanted to see her sister come back to life as a walker, not fully understanding what she just did. She had killed her sister, extinguished her life just to see her as a zombie, the budding seed of a psychopath that saw no wrong. Since the dead come back, death doesn't matter to her anymore, with Carol having to make her look at the flowers to get rid of a growing risk, having to take out a child whose mind was never meant for such a world. On the opposite end were the residents of Alexandria. When the horde swooped in and the survivors had to stealth their way through walkers, the young boy Sam could only whimper in fear, sheltered from the effects of the destruction of society, with Carol's words to him echoing through the young boy's mind, that he would be eaten alive and feel everything. He then sees a child walker. Again, this is something that is not seen often in this universe, but is now used to accentuate a point. Again, there is nothing but adult zombies unless the script needs it to show his upcoming fate. Sam, because of his crying and unreadiness to deal with what was in front of him, was immediately eaten alive. And it was shown in detail to shock us and catch us off guard, because we still never expect a child to be taken in that way, in such a gruesome manner, no matter how many times it happens, and in front of his family, causing his mother to also fall and his brother to go berserk and shoot Carl. In jest, Carl not being immune to the bullet that would claim his eye. Then we look at the adults of the universe that can't handle this kind of of reality. Tyrese, the voice of Coach, even died almost willingly because he could not cope with having to deal with killing zombie kids and himself getting bitten, dying to the world that he could not live in anymore. Each encounter with a living or dead child revealed more about the psyche of everyone involved. How some are not prepared to sacrifice the old world. How not preparing and just sitting idly by can cost even the most protected of us to lose our lives. How it can warp developing minds. How children are often and always will be considered individuals in need of sheltering from the worst parts of the world. But in a man-eat-man world, not gearing them and ourselves up to that reality will only leave everyone weak and feeble. The same points are also in the Telltale game. To the concept of a child zombie. In the first season, kids weren't ever seen amongst the copy-paste zombie models or amongst the living outside of Clementine and Duck. Lee and Kenny, discovering the child in the attic, drove home the idea of preparing a child for the world lest they suffer agonizingly. The boy had starved to death in the attic, awaiting his parents and/or rescue, only for it to never come and for him to suffer one of the most painfully dragged out deaths possible, leading to his walker form to even be brittle and weak, unable to move and to attack the spectating adults who could only look in despair. The child even looked like Kenny's son Duck, who was spared turning but still died just days ago. The choice to execute the zombie kid being up to the player if they can handle it or not, following the choice just earlier where a bitten duck had to be killed by you or Kenny, before Duck's inevitable transformation into a walker, coming to terms with having to kill off a child zombie. Yes, it is a walker that needs to be killed, but that does not extinguish the fact that this was and is a child. An unbearable choice for some players where they can choose to avoid it altogether, because that is what reality would be like, all while a young girl in the corner sits by and watches your choices. The parallel side of this was guiding Clementine herself to be ready for anything, teaching her how to deal with this world, how to deal with other people, how to shoot a gun, cut her hair, and more. Clementine herself is a case study in kids in the zombie apocalypse, transforming into a survivor while so many other adolescents transformed into the dead because of their unwillingness to cope with this world and dealing with others, with there only realistically being two waging factions at large across the planet, the ones that die and the ones that survive. Clementine would go up against countless undead, taking them on, stitching up her own wounds by herself, having battles of will and words on how the living should coexist, and fighting with them or working with them accordingly. Even watching as other kids her age, like Sarah, could only sit back and be eaten alive. Again, those like Sarah had been coddled through this all. Again, treating a child like a child in this and coddling them through this all, meaning only death for them. But beyond this philosophical roundabout within The Walking Dead, there is more to it than just kids being shaped within the zombie apocalypse, and it being how much darker things can get when the children we see are the very zombies trying to devour us. Children have been a decent narrative microcosm for adult behavior in lawless scenarios. Look no further than the 1954 novel Lord of the Flies. Children are a great purpose for that powerful narrative tool, to see how we either devolve or evolve in these drastic situations. It's a pretty decent example of why media choose to use children so few and far between in a medium known for blood and gore. Senseless violence against tons of undead kids would wear thin for many audiences. To some of us zombie fanatics, we are so desensitized that we only see zombies to be chopped up there. But realistically, seeing a child zombie getting blasted would be too much, with the visage of a child being too much, discounting the movie Cooties, where it reveled in its concept of only zombie children. Most media elect to only use kids in the zombie medium for one of a few purposes: for shock value, to prove a point and or accentuate something, or how adults on and off the screen will react to it. It's the emotional punch to the gut that leaves us stunned, sometimes at a great cost, between a character's survival, the audience's attention, and more. Dawn of the Dead 2004 started off its own zombie outbreak in a similar fashion to The Walking Dead, having the first encountered zombie be that of a little girl. This particular girl is one that both the characters and the audience have seen before, skating around the neighborhood the day before, conversing with adults, only for her to show up in their bedroom the next morning with her upper lip ripped off. Worried for her well-being, Lewis goes to check on her, getting bitten in the process, causing Anna to see what this brand of undead was like: fast-moving, durable, and relentless, with Lewis bleeding out as he reanimates and attacks Anna. Using a child to lure in unaware adults that had missed all the warning signs was a decent way to utilize a kid when going forward only adult zombies are seen. Well, except for that one baby scene. There was some build up to it, but still, that baby shot was purely for shock value and laughs for other people, I think. But Zack Snyder really wanted dead babies in his zombieverse. He brought that back in Army of the Dead when two alpha zombies banged and almost pooped out a pure baby zombie. Sam and Henry's tragic story in The Last of Us was there to parallel Joel and Ellie's, protecting a child against the dangers of the world, only for Henry to erratically have to gun down his infected brother and in turn shoot himself. Henry had never harmed anyone else up until that point, and knowing he had to shoot his kid brother was too much for him to handle, but knowing that his sibling was far gone and a monster. Having zombie kids be the harbingers of death has been an unsettling motif to separate from the adult undead even since the beginning of the zombie trope back in Night of the Living Dead. Cooper had spent the majority of the movie proclaiming that the cellar was the only option for survival, having his deathly ill daughter remain there. When the horde was breaking into the farm and unrest hit the survivors, Ben shot the erratic Mr. Cooper, in his last moments going downstairs to reach for his sickened daughter before dying. Mrs. Cooper follows him to only find their daughter dining on his flesh, a dark sight that audiences were not expecting at the time, and definitely were something that elevated the horror to have the little girl grab a trowel to stab her mother to death with an eerie sound, not expecting their own daughter to become the monster they were trying to hide away from. And like I've said before, Romero's first film and its depiction were so gut-wrenching and vomit-inducing for viewers that were not used to something like this. To have a little girl become a mindless killer of even her own mother was shocking. The first kid zombie we ever see in the world, and it doesn't even act like the typical zombie. Just a brutal, cannibalistic killer, tracing our steps back to the point of few and far between kid zombies and them being used for a purpose. It may seem like I'm tangenting and not really explaining why there are no kids in zombie apocalypses, just talking about iconic kid unfriendly moments in zombie history, but it's their purpose. They have to have a purpose to even be around in this setting. The medium is disturbing and brutal. While some comedies have zombie kids to bop around, most zombie games, movies, and TV shows do not want to have protagonists killing offspring left and right, leaving the kids the only section of the apocalypse to be reserved for one of two things: to either make the kids invincible plot-armored individuals like every horror or action movie that have kids there purely to give the main characters a goal outside their own survival, the kids are never in real danger, or to save these kids for tragic scenes that shift the narrative going forward. Everything I stated shows how kids ramped up how awful things were getting, or to show how bad things already were. It is that narrative tool that isolates the kids in the apocalypse. So behind the scenes and at the writer's table, it can make sense for them to be so scant across the zombie landscape. Even when zombie kids show up though, it can still serve as a moment of hesitation for even armed professionals, as seen in the movie Resident Evil Vendetta, where the zombified kiddo holding an RC car remote control was able to swiftly attack and infect soldiers. I mean, the whole thing is a zombie sin in the works, considering the soldiers saw saw the kid was bloodied and shit and had fought tons of zombies before, but they stopped and got caught off guard by a kid zombie nonetheless. Chris Redfield had to drop everything to kill off every infected soldier there, and even the zombie child, by blowing him up with the grenade off screen. I guess they couldn't go too far with the violence in that concept, especially with its video game origins. Which brings me to the next point. Video games and how they handle the younglings and how movies do as well. More so the lack thereof kids in the zombies we fight against. Dead Island perfectly reflects this. The franchise as a whole started from a captivating trailer of a girl falling from a building in reverse to show her attacking her family after turning. A tragically beautiful video that in no way resembled what Dead Island was about. And to top that off, this zombie girl is never seen again, or anywhere in the game, or anyone of that age group in general. Just bikini clad and tourist deadites and special Zambos until you get into the jungles, then you fight some of the adult natives. And as I said before, there's a big reason why zombie kids can't be something you commonly fight against. ESRB and PEGI ratings boards would outright ban games if they were included, but that is a blatantly obvious state of fact anyone can draw as a conclusion. Some franchises have found workarounds to this over the years. Dying Light Screamer mutated from a toddler. Its abilities set it apart from other special infected cohorts in the game. When it detects a survivor, it will emit high-pitched sounds to prevent it from being attacked and alert nearby zombies. While it can be shot, it is most famously put down with the simple sleeper hold to have the screamer avoid being a part of the bloodshed that every other zombie gets in the game. The reality being that Techland wanted to have diversity in its infected age ranges and found a clever way to make sure violence against a child is not depicted. I guess that's why the screamer did not return for the sequel game. Same can be said for the newts in Days Gone, kids between the ages of 9 to 11 that turned, but due to their size and fragility compared to other freakers made them basically hyenas of this zombie apocalypse, picking at scraps or weakened survivors. What are most obviously former kids sprinting around that are required to be executed in certain sections. However, in an interview with Stevivore, Steve Wright asked Sony Ben's Emmanuel Roth if they could be considered children, with the response being this: no, they are not. Really, they're more of a crawling creature and more of a different type of gameplay. It's a variation on the kind of creature we can offer. We don't think of any of the freakers as human beings. They are all feral, cannibalistic creatures with ferocious appetites that live on instinct alone. The virus has mutated them into something entirely new. So basically, Days Gone fully went in on the zombie kid aspect. But instead of creating mechanics to circumvent the violence aspect, they instead elected to say, well, they were kids, but freakers aren't really humans either. A simple response to be realistic with a virus that infects the entire populace. Just labeling kids zombies as something minute to circumvent ratings BS. While I've said in the past that Dead Space's necromorphs are not zombies, it is still notable to mention their lurkers and crawlers, enemy types clearly based on infants, but transforming their shape so much that they are just outside the child framework and skeletal structure, being all-inclusive with its biomass hive mind. Terrifying beyond human recognition, but inclusive with the kids nonetheless, making the scene with the first lurker in the grieving mother so much more insane. But with Dead Space and Days Gone, they went out of their way to say their creatures were not, in fact, kids. The same cannot be said for No More Room in Hell, having actual numerous zombie kids to run and gun. The game did receive some controversy back in 2013 after being out for 2 years when the wider gaming audience discovered that the zombie kids in the game were shootable and killable. But realistically, they were zombies, with people mass reporting the game to the ESRB only for it to fail since the game was both unrated, free to play, and a mod of an existing game, so it could not be affected by the ESRB. The developers of the game stuck to their guns with zombie children being included as well as being killable just like any other Zed, stating that they set out to make a zombie game focused on tension alongside moral choices, and that kids would and should not be omitted from the real-world collapse of society. Which kudos to them for not compromising on that.
But are there going to be zombie kids coming in No More Room in Hell 2? So yeah, I'm going to answer this one up front. They're not currently planned for our early access launch. We are focused on a lot of other things, all the major core mechanics of the game. So no, not right now.
Well, the devs for the game may have backtracked on this with the development of their upcoming sequel, No More Room in Hell 2, saying there won't be child zombies at launch to possibly avoid controversy, but also to make themselves more available to the ESRB and wider public. That is probably what it is, but who knows? We do know that they were basically the only zombie game that really focused on-screen child violence for a time, as well as making them a regular part of the zombie hordes instead of just special child zombie encounters. Incorporating kids can make diverse zombie droves you fight against, mainly to make smaller, frailer foes. Kids and adolescents make a good chunk of the populace, so having representation there is kinda cool, even if it is fucked up. In most cases, in the basis of this video from before it was even conceived was the fact that many zombie apocalypses just straight up have no kids to speak of or to be seen, both as survivors out in the world or as zombies. So outside of in-game conclusions with enemy types and NPCs, what about the story explanations behind it all? Lore-wise, the virus in many of these scenarios simply does not affect kids, and more appropriately, the virus infects adults, while the infected adults will go and kill younger people and older people, with the basis of the disease being that it is way too taxing on children and the elderly, overclocking the body to shut down vital organs while also seizing control of the brain to transform an individual, being way too much for underdeveloped minds and aging psyches, possibly in the early stages of dementia and Alzheimer's. This virus may deem the brains of the young and old not worthy of transmitting it effectively, choosing to instead kill off the body, electing only the able-bodied and healthy population to be eligible viral bachelors and bachelorettes, with all others just dying off left and right without ever turning. Now you can definitely beg the question of, if they're all dead, then where are the bodies? A simple but extremely coincidental explanation would be that their bodies are in areas inaccessible to the player or out of view of the camera. They could have also been completely devoured and ripped to pieces where traces are not even seen considering their smaller portions. Children may also have been taken into areas out of reach for their safety before being overwhelmed or slowly fading away, as seen with the attic child in Telltale's The Walking Dead. Many such examples in large franchises can be discerned in this way. Left 4 Dead's Green Flu kept an exclusively adult infected populace. With it being airborne in its beginnings, many infected would crop up in a flash. The Green Flu may very well not even affect children, but with everyone that is infected becoming aggressive and violent, any non-infected would meet grim and brutal deaths. That is most likely what happened to the children in this universe. 28 days later did show an infected kid getting beaten up, but with how far in the rage virus outbreak was, most kids would long be gone, especially with 28 weeks later and there only being 2 kids when they came back to London. World War Z the movie, it's trash, yet it omitted sick people and we only ever saw a couple kids. So maybe kids were not seen as suitable hosts for the virus, only having prime and healthy targets in its crosshairs. We all know it's because it's a summer blockbuster and you can't show anything about kids because they're trying to make the most money, but that's the explanation I have to go with. This is in the same regard with Army of the Dead, only ever seeing adult corpses, possibly as a tribal mentality with the alpha zombie, who gathered his zombie horde of followers over the procreation of his newly born pure zombie baby life, choosing not to have any zombie youth unless made by necrophiliac banging. Yes, I just said that, but they want pure zombie infants. Resident Evil floated with the use of kids off and on, with each strain, I suppose, picking and choosing who was ripe for infection. Dying Light originally converted adolescents into screamers, but in the transition from the Haran virus into the THV, the disease opted out of the family-friendly fun, choosing to instead make more deadly abominations with the flesh it could accumulate. boy. Back 4 Blood's Ridden acts in a similar way to Halo's Flood, taking the biomass of dead organic matter and creating new life forms from it, seeing non-adult life forms to not be sufficient to attack healthy individuals. The Ridden would most likely just convert children into meat for the worm piles to create special infected Ridden hives and the giant kaiju beasts. The same can be said for other franchises that use infected people for biomass purposes to create more abominations, like The Last of Us, and even though I don't consider them zombies, it's a good explanation for Halo and Dead Space, despite Dead Space actually using kids and babies in creative but not as common ways. COD zombies having a singular mind controlling the zombie populace could easily just omit children, choosing to not use them, either teleporting them away, destroying them all, or what have you. Maybe as a way of the mind that's controlling them all, saying that children should not be involved in this violence, especially since one of the minds is a child, or that the children across the world are not strong enough as dead soldiers to achieve their plans of world domination. Many more examples are out there, I'm sure, but these are just a few key components to conclude why kids are not included in many apocalyptic scenarios. Some outbreaks did not hesitate to have kids. Cooties, Zombieland, The Walking Dead, Shaun of the Dead, each having prominent parts or at least some key features with kids. But it all loops back to my original point where I said before that kids serve a specific narrative purpose if they are included, not shying away from zombification for all ages, but being selective in how they are used. Ultimately, it comes down to narrative purpose, to reflect the darkness that would actually be a zombie outbreak, since it would affect us all and not make anyone immune. Well, unless they're immune to the virus, but you get what I mean, immune to the carnage and brutality. And to explain the virology and scientific side and lore, well, it's so biological and gameplay purpose-driven plot points can make it happen. But in most cases, if you're a kid, well, you ain't gonna be anywhere near the apocalypse. That's about it though. School's out for the election season. You ready to vote? I'm ready for this to be over, but that ad revenue from election season sure has been poggers. Do people still say poggers? I don't know. I'm sure there is a lot I probably got wrong or that I should have included. What do you think? Are there other kid zombies out there I did not mention? I know there was something from Resident Evil 2's remake, but I just didn't include it. Why do you think canonically zombie kids are not included in a lot of universes? Compete and discuss in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and all that, and throw in $1 on my Patreon or YouTube channel memberships so you can be on the screen here. Thanks to Chago, aka Quick Flicks, for editing this video together. Until next time, I'm Zackass, aka Wow Such Gaming. Never forget to stay happy, stay healthy, be a child at heart and in death, and stay well.